Included in your package, you'll find your Tottoms fork and motor assembly, a fresh chain, your ESC or speed controller, the ESC mounting plate with its hardware and locking pin, and finally the 48-volt battery with its bolts. As for the tools, you'll need a large crescent wrench or the Tottoms spanner wrench, a 16 or 17 millimeter wrench, a 16 or 17 millimeter socket with a ratchet, a 10 millimeter wrench, a pick, some scissors or wire cutters, some assorted Allen keys, a screwdriver, a zip tie, and finally, you'll of course need your crazy cart. Step 1, disassembly. We will first need to remove all the Phillips head screws holding on the plastic fairings so that we can slide both of them out of the way and access our stock assembly. Grab the proper Allen key and slightly loosen the steering wheel, just enough so that we can pull the wheel out. Take your spanner or crescent wrench, loosen the top nut holding on your headset, and remove the nut, and do the same with the top hat. Look for these two bolts holding together the battery mount. Remove the thumb screw on this side. Grab your Allen key and remove this other bolt holding it together. Push the bolt through and remove the mount. Now we can slide the battery out. Look for its connector, push the little clip holding them together, and disconnect. To remove the fork, we will need to disconnect this motor wire connector and remove the housing so we can slide it through the cable trolley. Take a pick or a very small Allen key and push the little tabs on the inside of the connector. You'll be able to pull both of the spades right through. Now slide the stock motor wires through, lift the cart up, and pull the entire fork assembly up and out. Make sure to leave this top headset bearing in its position, careful not to damage, and remove the bearing on the fork so that it does not get damaged either. We will need these later. Find your throttle cable and disconnect it from the speed controller. Disconnect these two red cables on the on-off switch. You can leave the black one. Take another Allen key and remove the two bolts holding on the stock ESC. And after all that's done, you should be left with a cart that looks something like this. Step 2, fork assembly. To use the Tottoms kit, we will need the wheel, axle bolt, and axle bolt spacers from the stock fork. Begin by removing the 3 Phillips head screws holding together the chain guard. Grab your 16 or 17 millimeter wrench. This size is different depending on the year of your cart. Loosen the axle bolt and slide it out to free up your wheel. Remove your wheel and also remember to grab the axle bolt spacers. Now we can begin putting together your brand new Tottoms fork. Lay your Tottoms fork on a flat surface using the stem. Be very careful not to knock it over. Take your brand new chain included in your kit and lay one end inside of the fork and hang the other over the fork on the outside. Do not use the old chain as it has a different linkage length. Lay your axle bolt inside one of the holes on the fork. Take your wheel and insert one of the spacers into its place. Be careful to make sure you're aligning the sprockets on the correct side. Insert the wheel inside the axle bolt through one end. Now take your second spacer and insert it on the other side and finish pushing your axle bolt all the way through. Put on the washer, then the lock washer, and finally the nut. Make sure to tighten both sides down very firmly. We can now attach our new 42 link chain, attaching it to the bottom sprocket first and keeping the tension so it doesn't fall off. Attach it to part of the top sprocket and spin the wheel to get it to grab the wheel sprocket. All Tottoms kits are pre-tensioned so that the motor is the proper distance away from the sprocket so you have the correct chain tension. But as an example, you can see this chain is too tight to fit. To adjust, make sure to take the chain off of the top sprocket, Loosen these 3 bolts holding the motor to its mounting plate. You'll need your Allen key as well as a 10mm wrench. We'll go ahead and loosen all 3 bolts, and only loosen them enough so the motor can freely move up or down. Now again, put the chain onto the bottom and top sprockets and spin the wheel until the chain fully wraps itself around the wheel sprocket. Check the tension by pushing the chain to each side and push the motor down or up until your chain has a little less than 1 inch of total movement from side to side. After you have the right tension, tighten each motor mount bolt down very firmly to lock it into its position. Check again to make sure the chain tension is correct, and do a spin test to the wheel to make sure everything spins freely. Step 3, kit assembly. We'll begin by assembling our ESC mounting plate. Note that there are 2 sets of mounting plate screws in your kit due to the fact that not all crazy carts have the same mounting hole size. Now make sure that this slotted hole in the mounting plate is facing the opposite end of your drift bar. Take your countersunk mount screws and insert it through one of the holes on the mounting plate to the holes on the steering column. Do the same with the second screw, and make sure you fully tighten both countersunk screws down. Now take your ESC with its locking pin, face the long battery wire towards the drift bar, slide it into the mounting plate, and insert the locking pin. Take your throttle pedal cable and look for these 3 pins on the top. Now take your throttle cable from the ESC and connect it to those top pins and lock it into its connector. Now grab the on-off switch wires from the ESC and remove the paper. Route each wire one by one underneath the ESC mounting plate and grab each one on the other side. Connect them both to the stock on-off switch to the same spade connectors we disconnected them from the earlier step. They should be the 2 connectors to the left side when looking at the switch from below. Now we can take our fully assembled Tottoms fork and put on the headset bearing, making sure that the balls are facing up and the metal ring is facing down. Lift up from the front of the cart and insert the stem through the steering column, being extremely careful not to squish the headset bearing. It should sit flush and spin freely. If you try to assemble it like this, then you will crush the bearing and you will have to order another set. After it's sitting nice and flush, we can take our headset top hat and screw it all the way down on the stem. Put on the washer, and finally screw on the top nut all the way down, squeezing them together. I like to tighten them both down from the top, then loosen just the bottom one so it presses them together and locks it down. Make sure not to tighten too tight or too loose so there isn't any play, but also allowing the fork to spin freely. This is very important. Take the motor wires from the top of the fork and insert them through the steering column's cable trolley. This will take some finagling, but eventually you'll be able to grab it on the other side and pull it all the way through. Pull all the cables through so that it's tight. Then take your fork and spin it in each direction so that you go through its full range of motion. Spin the fork all the way to the left and remove any give from the cable so there isn't any gap or play. Take your zip tie and lock it down on the trolley. You'll see a slight opening for it. Clip off the excess with your scissors or wire cutter and move the fork back to center. Now we can take our motor wires and connect them to the motor wires on the ESC. Make sure that black goes to black and color goes to color. It isn't the end of the world if you accidentally swap these. The motor will just spin in the opposite direction, so make sure you line these colors correctly. Take the connector and push it up and out of the way underneath the steering column. Now we can grab the battery box along with the 2 long screws. Slide the battery box underneath the steering column, making sure the Tottoms logo and charger port is facing towards the drift bar. Take one of the screws and insert it through the battery box and connect it to the hole on the steering column. Use a light if you need help finding the hole. Do the same with the other side. Insert the steering wheel back into the stem and tighten it back down. Make sure the fork spins freely without grabbing on anything, and twist your battery cable to get that Tottoms aesthetic and insert it into the battery. Turn your cart to the on position and push the throttle. Congratulations, you now have a fully assembled Tottoms 900W race kit.